Welcome to the Threat Management Office Hours. We've got a pretty good group here today to talk about items on our agenda, which I think are fairly empty right now. So this is going to be ad hoc. So hopefully folks, Kev or Dominic, if you guys have questions or items that you came to discuss. One bit of advice I've gotten from folks who are running other office hours is that in the future, it would be beneficial for us to put together sort of a, here's some topics that we're going to dig into and ask engineers to come prepared with sort of an overview. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to do that coming out of the holidays. So I will work with Tiago and the team for the upcoming office hours and Matt and Sam to try and provide sort of a base level of agenda. But that being said, we don't have one for today. We could puzzle, which is what we did last time. And I think that's why Jonathan came. But that being said, Kev or Dominic or Subhashish or Jonathan, anyone, do you guys have questions or topics that you want to bring to the table?
I didn't come with anything specific in mind, but I can create topics.
Okay, that's a skill.
Yeah, there's surely issues for that, but can you speak to what, like the security, the dashboard and not the report, the actual dashboard? Like what's in store for that? Where are we going with that page? Now it has the nice little graphic. It feels a little naked to me. I was wondering, like, what's the future for that?
Cool. Jonathan, you want to take that one?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share. This is kind of like draft thoughts right now. So caveat that this is only, I've had a week back to kind of like rearrange things after 2 weeks off. So still loading some of the stuff up, but looking at what we did last year, the key thing was to start splitting apart the dashboard into the vulnerability report and then the actual dashboard pages themselves. And you're right, they do look very sparse or naked right now because there were two things and now there's one. What I think I would like to see happen this year is for the group dashboard in particular to start adding between 3 to 4, we'll call them like high value, high utility widgets, visualization widgets. So top of mind things for that one are like how long has a vulnerability been open? So your mean time to remediation. So you can kind of track how you're doing in terms of how long things are hanging around. Calling more attention to potential trouble spots in projects. I know we've got the project, we call them the scorecard or the letter grades that they're assigned now, but making those more, I guess, contextualized so that you know that there's something beyond just, these projects have this many vulnerabilities of a severity. Calling out things like where there are projects that potentially are not configured for scanning or have never been scanned. That's a gap right now. So ideally, if we could get like 3 or 4 of those.
Part a lot.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of great feedback from you and your team. We've had several requests from customers. Another one, and this is more kind of on it's part compliance and part how am I doing, is show me what I've got currently in all my projects in this group that are on, it could be OWASP top 10 is a real common one, or the top 25 CWEs list. I don't have the issues for this yet because this is kind of something I was thinking about last week and realizing, what do we need to do with that? An interesting insight that I got this morning is, so I track page views and usage or unique usage of a lot of the areas of vulnerability management. I would say the security center, so the personalized dashboard, and interestingly enough, project level they're roughly flat over the last 6 months, but the group utilization for both the security dashboard and the vulnerability report have been steadily increasing for many, many months. And I think that makes a little bit more sense to me in the context of having now a little bit more customer feedback. People like that group level view. because it gives them more of kind of that top down. And so I think that's going to be an important area to focus on more. Some of the things at the project level may make sense to, or I said the other way around, group widgets to put on the project dashboard, but I think the group is where we'll see the most potential benefit in the near term.
So Matt, was your thought on the main trouble spots being, excuse me, like annotating like which files or might have the most vulnerabilities, or what vulnerabilities are most common throughout the project? And just kind of have like the top 2 or 3 of those on the dashboard as well, like the biggest bang for your buck type ones.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the files as much as calling attention to, like, if you have a group that says, you know, dozens, or maybe even some of these folks that I talk to, they might have 100+ different projects inside of like one really large group, right? A big corporation, it might be an entire business unit or something, and then all their projects are there.
for example.
Yeah, GitLab org, there you go. So just being able to have a roll-up view of, I need to know everything that I care about that's got a critical vulnerability in it that is active in the default branch right now. So that kind of, you know, that quick check. But then when I have these dozens or hundreds of projects like that, I need to know if something has gone wrong in my process of scanning the project. So that's another really common request is, you know, show me where, like, maybe something got screwed up. Somebody made a change to one of the configuration files and the scanners are not completing the jobs. So I may not realize that I've got a blind spot on a project where I think I'm still scanning, but it's actually not completing. And so my results are, you know, a month out of date or something like that. So it's a kind of like, yeah, project health metrics in terms of the actual scanning and what's still there.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about this, I haven't thought about it much myself, but, you know, thinking about like something that might be useful is something around most recently found vulnerabilities. Like, you know, if there's a list, like these are the top, like these have been the most recent found, top 5, top 10 in a small widget. So you know what you've introduced most recently into a project.
Some of that comes back to the sorting by detected date that we're still working on. I mean, we've got the age right now, or we've got the date. We don't have the age, right?
Yeah, and I know that we have a lot of that on the vulnerability report. But, you know, I'm thinking of just the top ones. Oh, hey, yeah, these this is new, or oh yeah, we haven't had anything new in the last 2 months. I mean, I know that we can see that in the dashboard as well. It's like, what did we introduce?
Another time of types of vulnerabilities is something interesting too, because we often wonder as a team, like, did our efforts to mitigate this type of vulnerability pay off, or do we manage our dependencies better, or did we improve our security posture around authorization bugs? So if we see that going down, we can get a feeling that something we're doing works. Right now, it's like, I feel like we're having fewer HackerOne reports. So nice metrics and dashboard would make also great material for the salespeople, I think. Like when we're doing good, just like, hey, see how this has decreased so much over time.
That's a really great point about our own performance. I think what you're talking about there is really in line with some of those, like the top 25 CWEs. Changing that a little bit, people have also requested, I think exactly what you're saying is, show me the types of the families of vulnerabilities over time. So I know if I need like training around a particular area, like I'm seeing a lot of cross-site scripting errors and they're not going down. Maybe I need to go talk to the team about that, or pulling out.
But even in CWEs, you have some sort of hierarchy. Like there's a CW for XSS generic, and then you have a bunch of child CWEs. So yeah, when we have a more precise one, we might be able to know that it also belongs to the parent one and kind of have it included in that, or I don't know.
Well, that's probably good food for thought for Jonathan and Shubhashish as you kind of get started on this. the question of how we map in between some of these different types of information. So we do have the CWE set. OWASP is different, but there are mappings between a lot of the CWEs and the OWASP categorizations. And as Dominic pointed out, there's a hierarchy, and sometimes the scanners will give you the highest level, most generic parent. Other times, I forget how many depths it can go to. It's like 3, maybe 6. I don't know, the children, if you ladder those up, kind of trying to be able to standardize that information is going to be really important.
I'm on the MITRE website, and you have as generic as improper neutralization of input. So that's like injection at large. And then you can go on like stored XSS or like just a bunch of you even have like XSS through an encoded URI scheme in a web page, like super precise. So yeah, knowing there's too much granularity at some point.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, to be able to see like on a top level, like in the groupings, that'd be useful. Even the scanner types on this front page. I mean, Matt, and I was thinking this too as well. Are we going to be adding more ways to filter this vulnerability over time graph, or are we just going to kind of keep it as is? I might have missed that in some of the meetings, but
that's actually probably a good thing to check in on. So there were a couple of additional filters that we had deferred at the time, just so we could actually get the main graph out. I think there was supposed to be, I think the only thing missing is potentially setting custom time windows on there.
Because I mean, it doesn't. I would think we would be able to pull based on scanners, like different scanners over time. Filter which scanner is up there, using groupings. You know, make this graph more robust.
No, that's a great thought. You should open an issue for that, John.
I should. I'll throw that out there after this meeting. I'll throw this out. And also, you know, maybe clicking on these dots to do something. Just looking at it right now.
There you go.
There's a couple of issues. There's some icons that are missing right now, and then like Matt said, the time-based restrictions. But I like your idea.
Yeah, I'd say in general, and I've talked a lot to Andy about this, I don't want us to be in a position long-term where we feel like we're just sort of a widget factory where we're almost like professional services. So I want to really try to focus on delivering. There's some really common visualizations that you see across basically all the competitors in the space because they make sense for things like that. So these vulnerability trends, SLAs, any problem spot markers. Ideally, we would end up with somewhere between 4 and 6 of these out of the box. That's your preset dashboard, and then one of two ways, and I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but long term, we either allow people access to the data and give them some sort of simple chart builder. There is, I don't want to mention the name, but there is one particular competitor who actually does this really well. And you have your limitations, like you can pick do you want a line chart, a pie chart, a bar graph? Here are the facets. And then you can kind of construct your own visualizations, but it's not like they've recreated a BI tool, right? You're not going to get that kind of thing. The other side of that is we just give everybody the data. I mean, we have open GraphQL APIs, and we make sure that they have access to that, and then they can pull that into whatever visualization tool of their choice. And I know we actually have customers that are already doing that. I've seen some pretty impressive dashboards, things that I think we could take inspiration from. They are a little company specific for our purposes, but yeah, that's kind of where my head is right now. Half a dozen great out of the box. And, yeah.
Periscope, is it how it's called? What are
the Sisense?
Sisense, yeah, dashboards about time to mitigations and which issue has been opened when. So if you have like this chart and you see like everything is kind of condensed towards recent times, but you see like something in 2016 that just pops, you're like, oh, we have this old thing laying around, kind of makes it obvious on the graph that you have this thing you might have forgotten or something like that. If you're looking for dashboard ideas, the AppSec managers have a few dashboards that they probably have a shopping list.
That's a great place to start digging in. And it's worth mentioning, one of the first things that we'll need to address before we start adding more than a couple of these is a way to actually like basic configuration on the dashboard, because I know not everybody's going to want some of these things. So how can you just turn things on, turn them off? Maybe even basic sort ordering.
It's a great question, Dominic. You have any more?
I actually have a question. Because when I was last working on the security dashboard, quite a while back, I saw that the security dashboards are now the vulnerability lists, and the security dashboard is now this new graph that you got. And but we're still you were still calling it security dashboard in the issues and in the code. So that's a little bit confusing.
So make sure I understood what you said, Kev. So you're saying that in the code, we're not consistent with how we're referencing things. We're calling it the security dashboard when it should be the security center. I see Alexander smiling and nodding his head.
Yeah, so there's on the project, for example, there's the security dashboard and the vulnerability list. And the vulnerability list is actually in the code the security dashboard. And I think there's also a security dashboard label, because it was called security dashboard either in the group or in the project before, and now it's renamed. So that's a bit confusing.
I'm glad you're realizing that. Go ahead, Alexander.
Oh yeah, that I remember when I was creating the new security dashboard with all the charts on it, which is now technically, well, I guess the security center represents all the pages, right? And then, but anyways, when I was creating that security dashboard page, you're right, security dashboard was already there, and I didn't think I should rename it as part of that MR, so I just called it security charts. And then I thought I created an issue to change all the names, but I did not, it seems. So I should go back and do that, but that'll be an issue coming to you shortly.
Okay, nice.
Well, Alexander, I know we still have some work around getting rid of the term first-class vulnerabilities. I believe we still have an issue open around that. I know that Kev helped us with some improvements to our folder organizational structure, but I don't think that takes out those references to first-class vulns. Maybe this could be kind of wrapped into that as far as consistent terminology in the code.
Yeah, thank you. Great call out. I think that's probably what happened, is I was like, oh, that'll just be done part of that issue. Maybe
exactly what I was
made a
saying.
comment on, or maybe I did not. We shall see.
I think
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Kev.
I think there's a second one, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure I can find it right now, but there was one for the folder structure, and there was one for organizing something else.
Yeah. I think we're talking about the same one. So directly related to the improvements to how we're organizing our files and what we're calling our folders. There was one about removing references to a term that we don't use anymore. When we first introduced standalone vulnerabilities, we had a term first class vulnerabilities, and we threw it around a lot.
Yeah.
Cool. I will take an action item to follow up and add a comment to the issue about the first class vulnerabilities with this feedback from Kev.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Kev, for pointing that out. That had fallen off my radar.
Oh, good.
Alexander, would it help if I decided to rename everything again on the front end for 2021, and then we can just do this all over?
Yeah, while he's doing the other MR, renaming it.
Let's call it front end vulnerabilities.
Front end vulnerabilities.
I think the plan, if I remember correctly from the last meeting, was that we're going to put the date in all the file names. So like this will be like the 2021 vulnerabilities, and then, you know, we'll have to move it from there.
Nice. If it makes you feel any better, I keep going back and like looking for stuff. I'm like, oh, when did we change the name to vulnerability reports? Because we split it apart. So there's like all the information talks about the security dashboards up until like November. And then it's the dashboards and the vulnerability report. It's hard renaming things.
It's hard for sure.
And it got me in trouble with Sid in one of the like 2 times I've ever talked to him in an iteration office hours where we were asking about, I don't remember exactly, it was a different approach to how to break up these dashboards and get them in front of customers. And he was very hung up on the terminology of Security Center. And why isn't everything called Security Center? What is going on here? And I just totally threw Matt under a bus. I felt so bad afterwards.
That's what I'm here for.
No, it's not.
Not riding the bus rides you.
Hey, real quick, I just want to share my screen and share something to go back to part of our earlier conversation. This is
A lot.
yeah, in PDF form. So if I zoom out, you can see how terrifying this is, but also how well laid out. So these are all of the MITRE CWE classifications. So there are just these 6 or 8, 9, I can't count. These are the roots, and then it goes potentially all the way down 6 layers. So you can kind of see how everything is connected. And this is what I was talking about, is like sometimes a scanner is going to give you something like this. Interaction error, not super helpful, but it could also give you something, you know, drilled down to one of these more specific classifications. So it's going to be something we'll have to consider, is like, how do you make that association to say, you know, a 416 really rolls up to this 435, like, you know, as a potentially a manager or, you know, a team leader, something who's looking at this group level, trying to figure out where my trouble spots in terms of types of vulnerabilities being introduced. Going to have to make some sense. I don't know. I almost kind of wonder if this is like one of those, what do they call them? Those charts where you can like drill down onto stuff. You know, you start at the top level where it shows you kind of based on relative size and how many things are in it. You could start at the top level and sort of drill through.
I mean, we almost need like a tree structure to get this thing kind of.
Yeah, the visualization is going to be a challenge for sure. I mean, fortunately, this is a tree structure.
Yeah,
in fact, I think they offer like XML or JSON exports of this entire hierarchy.
And I think it's also important, if you want to graph it, you don't want to graph use after free and SQL injection. Maybe you want to graph the bigger groups, because if you have just a few of them, you could just get a very tiny graph which you can't use and can't give other people to see. But if it's grouped up, that's important. And to what it's grouped up, like you said, the interaction error, that might not be helpful either.
That's a great point.
There's probably one layer that's a little more useful than the rest for visualizations, at least. And like first iteration, if we don't have it drilling down, maybe the second layer or third is the sweet spot. I mean, it feels like the second from this view. Not sure about the more web-oriented stuff at the bottom, maybe, but like the first level is so vague that it's not even useful. And if you go, it feels like already at the third level, it's good information, but in a visualization, you basically have one of each.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, second level looks like for an initial graph might be the sweet spot.
Yeah, I worry about this kind of stuff. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's all the way out to layers.
Yeah, like authorization bypass through user controlled SQL. I mean, that's great if I'm reading the vulnerability detail, but improper authorization in the dashboard is probably fine.
So
Yeah.
I'm looking at this. I'm just trying to make sure like there's nothing where it's duplicated where it'll drill down to like for example, like something in third layer doesn't have two parents. Like it's all
Correct. Everything only has a single ancestor.
okay.
I think even at the second level here, improper access control for a dashboard, I'm happy with that, even if I don't have a incorrect user management, improper ownership management, and all of that. We messed up access control. That's what I want to know for a dashboard.
Oh, that's really great insight. Well, and even instead of a drill down, maybe it would be possible to actually, just if you just had a drop down to show you by the layers, if it just updated based on just that vertical slice instead of having to make that traversal something.
Yeah.
I think where that's going to be a little bit tricky is the MITRE top 25 CWEs. I haven't done a excuse me, a deep analysis of this, but I'm pretty sure they're sort of spread through the different layers.
I think
or the different levels. I don't think they all exist to just the
as
second
long
level,
as
though.
there's nothing in a top 25 that is a child of another entry, you
Oh,
could
yeah,
have
could be
like
bad.
each of the 25 items when you list it, you could include all of the children, and regardless of its level, as long as they don't include each other.
Yep.
And maybe when you're selecting for the graph, in the drop down, maybe there are like for the top 25 or the top level groups, there are counts, so you can select based off of that.
Now, Matt, were you saying like the top 25 are all the leaves? Like there's none of the top 25 have any descendants.
That I don't know. I'd have to
Okay.
go and look at that again. I just know that those are I guess, I don't know how often they reevaluate it, but I think it's the 25 most commonly made mistakes, basically, the CWEs that appear most frequently. And I would assume that they're at different levels of the hierarchy. Honestly, they're probably pretty far to the right. They're pretty far downstream, I would think, because they would have to have that level of specificity to not get into that problem like Dominic said, where, I've got this is number 5, and then this over here is number 8, but this is, it's a subset of it. And that could be a completely separate, chart, because that is a very specific thing people ask for, like the OWASP top 10, or the CWE top 25. Show me how I'm doing against those two benchmarks, because there's going to be stuff, of course, outside of those. But several customers that I've spoken to, that's how they measure their internal success to their clients, is they'll do things like prove that they have nothing in the OWASP top 10, for instance. But they may still want to know that they've got these other, potential problem areas internally like that.
Wouldn't you not display this graph then, but instead like have a widget that just lets you toggle between like, this vendor top 10, top 25, and then if the list is empty, just like say, hey, you don't have anything in the top 25, but then if you do, you just like list out the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm showing this, not that I think we'll use this as a visualization. This is more to give a visualization of what I'm talking about with this very, I don't want to say complex, because it's not, it's very, very large hierarchy of how the CWEs all sort of map up to each other.
So to Dominic's point earlier about being able to look at trends across findings across categories, is this the category level that you were thinking, Dominic, or at least like you were saying the first or second, that's where you'd like to see the impacts of your work and where the trends are changing over time?
Yeah, like improper access control, it's a second layer thing. It's not too deep, and but it's still constraints enough to be useful. Like we're better at avoiding authorization errors in our APIs. This will go down, and probably like there are probably other issues like injections, probably another second layer. This level is nice for the dashboard level, and being able to drill down is great too. But like injection is pretty wide. You can have SQL injection, XSS, which are very different, but still at the dashboard level, it's good to know, like, are we bad at validating our inputs? Are we bad at checking permissions? Are we bad or good at X or Y? So it gives a pretty good idea of where we have to focus.
Now, Matt, is this information we already have associated with our vulnerabilities? Are we already-
Some places, yes. So right now well, and for the foreseeable future, we're sort of relying on whatever the scanners output, and that's going to be the case of any tool we integrate. Depending on what's coming from the scanners, we may or may not get a CWE. If there's a CVE, it almost always will have one or more CWEs associated with it because that's part of the application process. Some of them are using alternate systems like the OWASP classifiers for things. So that's going to be a really big challenge, as well as an opportunity for us, is to provide sort of these mappings between some of the different systems, both sort of side to side and between OWASP and CWE, and then also vertically, can we drill up and drill down like in a CWE hierarchy? Because I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of choice, especially with the open source ones. It's kind of like you get what you get that comes in through the feeds. I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
So how often are these updated? Like, just thinking like how difficult would it be to maintain the database locally?
Probably not that difficult. If you look back at the CWE history that MITRE publishes, I think this is the 2017 version they're still working from. Prior to that, I think it was the 2013 version. So it's like it's every few years, and it's not like they throw away all the numbers and start over from scratch. I think you'll see there will be some additions, probably more like breaking apart things in more granular classification.
Yeah, they probably add things to the right of the graph.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see something where they just like, you know what, we solved it. Improper access controls gone away. Just trim the branch. We're done with that.
Yeah, I saw some bug recently in Fortinet login thing that just came out of the early 2000s, a string format exploit. And I was like, we're never throwing away types of exploits.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing these go away because there's going to be code that hasn't addressed them, so they're going to exist.
And there's old code running everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
And I don't know this for sure, but I believe they've left some gaps in some of the numbers in places where they can actually sort of extend forward instead of having to go and renumber things. I think that's kind of how they've tried to carry things to the standard, so that, you know, improper access control is 284, you know, back to whenever they introduced it. I don't think it'll be a big lift. It's a good question, though. One thing that, not 100% on this, but CWE feels like the right, what do we call it, system of record or way to measure things, to translate into in between. So if we can get things into CWEs, I think this clear hierarchy makes it a lot easier for us to do some of the visualizations, some of the, you know, correlations or grouping on the dashboard for some of the future work we have planned for this year. That probably makes the most sense to use as kind of the underlying, how do we classify vulnerabilities? If we have a CVE, we'll always show that because it's the most specific, but the CWEs in general is kind of what we're dealing with, since hopefully most of what we're finding outside of like the dependency scanners are unknown vulnerabilities out in the wild. So that's what we're going to get.
The OWASP top 10 will match in a way to the CWEs. It's not really. Well, it's not really meant as a competing system, and more like these things happen all the time, so you should pay attention to it. But like the number one is injection. So this is super wide, but surely you can pick a few of those second or third level CWEs and say this is OWASP number one, A1, and I'm pretty sure we have a one-to-one mapping, and there won't be much gray areas. Other than the good old OWASP insufficient logging thing that is probably won't have a CWE, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, well, that's one of the funky things with the OWASP and the CWEs is they're set at a very specific level. So if we have something that's more granular from a CWE, you would actually have to sort of go up the hierarchy until you get to the CWE that maps across to the OWASP category, if you're trying to do something like that.
Yeah, but I think if we're clear, and I think people will know that there are two different things. So if you show CWE, I don't know, 261 and say this map, this belongs to OWASP A5. It's not like this CWE is not A5, but it's part of it. So it's not one-to-one mapping. It's a child of A5, let's say. So you don't have. I don't think people will expect that for each OWASP A something there is one CWE.
Gotcha. Sorry, I think we're saying the same thing. I think what I was trying to point out is if we have the mapping of that 261 to A5, but we actually, well, if it's a layer below that, like let's say that we come over here and what if it's 256 is what we actually get from the scanner, we may have to map that back up until we find the CWE.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, ancestor that maps to the A5. That's just going to be a technical
computing
consideration for the team. Yeah, that's why we'll have to store it sort of like we have two different mapping. Well, we'll have to store the OWASP classifiers. We'll have to store all the CWE hierarchy. We'll have to store the mapping of the CWEs to the OWASP classifications and then be able to sort of move up and down as we need to.
Yeah, and for each, like, you have to walk up the tree and say, oh, yes, this belongs to A something. Or not.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing this map.
Yeah, absolutely. Incidentally,
Cool
there's an open source working group on, it's really more on the disclosure side of vulnerabilities, but Nicole and I are in there and it's like, my head is exploding because there's so many different standards and people keep showing up to this group with the different standards somebody has tried to start. And these are people that have way more experience in the field than I do, like decades, and they're going, whoa, I've never seen that one before. So pretty quickly came across the XKCD comic, the old classic about
yeah,
like,
I was about to mention
standards.
that.
That's right. We need to come up with a new standard to unify the standards. Like that's what we're dealing with.
And
here.
now we have a new standard. It's great.
Pretty much.
Disclosure is hard enough as it is.
And if you don't know how to communicate it, like this is where it comes into play, right? Everybody's got different ways of classifying the severity and then standards for interchange. It's like, oh my gosh, making this harder.
No big challenge trying to pull it all together into one tool. Do we have any other topics, questions, feedback on this diagram that Matt, you can probably stop sharing before I have nightmares about it.
Oh yeah,
All
Lindsay.
right.
Yeah. How did the wiki thing go that you commented in the snippet?
We haven't made any use of our wiki yet. I would say there's been some discussion about when it's appropriate to use the wiki and when it's better to make handbook changes or use issues in MRs. And there have been some very vocal opinions against wikis for a number of reasons. So Alexander, you look surprised. So, wikis are less discoverable because there's not a lot of history associated with them and the search doesn't find them as well. That was the feedback that I heard loud and clear. I can go out to our wiki and see if anyone's actually added anything to it.
Yeah, my biggest concern that I wrote was that you can't comment there. So it's really inaccessible, kind of.
Right. I do see some items under container security. And to your point, Kev, I think that, in most cases, we either have an issue or a handbook page. And with handbook pages, you can't make comments, which doesn't solve that. But any other thoughts on that, Jonathan or Alexander, as people have been part of the conversations about the wikis over the last couple of months with us?
It's been a while since we've talked about the wikis, and I had actually forgotten we have a wiki. Is that in the handbook? Where is the wiki anyway?
Here, I'll put the link right here.
Case in point.
Yeah. Where are we putting the link? In the wiki?
That's a container security one, but
I
you
have it.
yeah.
It's in the chat.
It's also on the agenda. Thanks, Kev.
You have a wiki?
We have a
Okay.
wiki.
Huh.
So Tiago created this, and I think we're not really all in agreement about when to use it is the problem.
Yeah. I don't think I even had it on mind that we had this, because we have stuff in the handbook, we have stuff in the docs, and I feel like organizational process stuff is in the handbook, any kind of application stuff is in the docs, and I do think that adding a third level of documentation, third location documentation, would be challenging.
Yeah, I think we'd have to have a real strong reason to put it here versus create a handbook page or add it to an existing handbook page. Alexander, as somebody who's been working in container security, given that there's some content hung off the container security page, do you have any thoughts on whether that's been useful or not? Have you looked at it at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I'm about to embark on getting the container security part of the application working locally, which requires many steps. And I am getting ready to document that as clearly as possible, and was wondering where that should go, because there are some like dev specific, I guess those could go in the docs. On like, there should be maybe a like subsection in the GDK portion that's like explains, or even in the GDK repo, there's some like how-to articles in there. So I think resonating with Jonathan said, there's already so many places to put docs. Besides, yeah, and I added a third one by saying there's some repos that just have markdown files that have instructions in them. So yeah, I think there's not a good case for a wiki. Though there's still like, there's a bunch of snippets floating around on like how to create alerts locally, how to create vulnerabilities locally, and like where do those end up? And maybe the handbook is actually like a link to the snippets in the handbook is maybe the best place.
So we have snippets for how to develop work with them locally, right? I would think some of that stuff should go into the GDK, because there's a bunch of how-to stuff in the GDK. I feel like some of that stuff would be useful to have over there. Because if I'm looking for how to do something locally and developing, that's usually the first place I look for it.
Yeah.
That's good, because I have the community contributor FAQ snippet in my bookmarks. So, I mean, I have it, but other people might not.
Yeah, and how do new people discover that? Except for like one of us slacking it to them, be like, check out this snippet.
Thank you for bringing this up, Kev. Again, I know we've had this discussion. I think it maybe kind of got lost a little bit over the holidays, and we can revive it. And Alexander, I think you'll have a good opportunity going into container security and what you're planning on documenting to give us your feedback.
There's also a bunch of stuff in the onboarding issue for this group. So like I have that saved because that also explains a lot. And I know the onboarding issue has been updated to include a lot of these important snippets.
So how can we share that information easily with community contributors? Maybe our onboarding issues need to be something that, are findable on the handbook or something along those lines, or at least the information that we find to be valuable to getting rolling with those or getting, developing with those.
Yeah, that could be a good way to do it.
So I think I missed the discussion. Was it, Kev, were you bringing up the wiki in that you were hoping we were going to use it, or like our community contributors, are they finding the wiki and then kind of not knowing where to go from there, expecting there's information that we have other places?
Yeah, well, so I think Lindsay, when I was working on a merge request, sent me the snippet, the community contributor FAQ, and that felt a bit off because it's not really discoverable like the handbook or the GitLab docs. So yeah, I was asking maybe that it's maybe good to put it in the handbook, or like you have this wikis. That's what the first that came to my mind. And so I asked about that to make these pages like more discoverable for other people.
And I don't see any risks in adding the links to the helpful snippets to the wiki. I mean, we're still keeping the information consolidated. We could also link to that snippet in other places as well. I think the goal really is to keep the information consolidated and then point there in the places where people can find it.
Yeah.
One thing that I wonder about is like the runner is non-trivial to set up. And so every time a community contributor pops up and is contributing to vulnerabilities with, and then showing screenshots of having real vulnerabilities in their local, I'm always kind of mystified, like, how did you do that? Kev, was our documentation good enough for the runner that you were able to set it up yourself without any problems?
I mean, I've already set up the runner for a project, so I mean, I knew about that, but it was still kind of hard, and I'm always happy when I don't have to reinstall GDK or reinstall the database, and I just have the vulnerabilities and not need to mess with it. Yeah.
For what it's worth, when reproducing security issues, I often need the runner, and using Docker, it's not too bad. If you, I don't know if you try to run it from sources, but with Docker, with a very simple Docker compose file, you kind of don't think about it and just start, stop.
Unless you're like Lindsay and forget to start your Docker image all the time and then spend forever troubleshooting that. Yeah.
Yeah, or that the Docker container can't access the instance. Like, I think there are multiple ways how to get there. But I think in the snippet there's something now, and I think that works.
So Kev, I'll take the action of updating our wiki to add links to the snippet. And then as a group, we can continue the discussion around what value the wiki is bringing to us and the right ways to use it. Alexander, I just cut you off. You were going to say something.
No, I was just going to thank everybody for their feedback.
Cool.
I just want to add on the runner issue. Like, I recently did the onboarding, and I find the documentation is pretty good on the runner. Like, to just I'm using the Docker thing, and it went well. Just to add. Yeah.
Nice, glad to hear it.
All right, well, we are at the end of our hour. We have another office hour scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And like I said at the beginning of the call, the plan is to try and start. This has been a great use of our hour. I think coming in without an agenda, I think this has been really informative. I hope everyone else agrees with that. But just to ensure that going forward, we do get some coverage over topics like what's happening in container security. I'll work with Tiago to start to seed these office hours with some areas where we feel like maybe we've gotten a lot of questions from people or that are more complicated that people want to learn more about. Thank you all for your time. I'll share the recording.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Everyone.